Hello, everyone. Welcome to the April edition of Field Advisors webinar series. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, Agronomic Outreach Manager for Illinois Soybean Association. Thanks for joining us today, taking some time out of your busy week for this live Q&A webinar with the Illinois Soybean Association Agronomy team. Before I introduce our panelists, I'm going to just cover some quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available after the live session. It'll be on Field Advisors YouTube channel. So go on there and subscribe if you haven't yet. And then it will be available via audio on the Field Advisor podcast. So if you haven't subscribed there, that's where you can catch the recordings. And those should be available within this afternoon or early tomorrow. And the link will be emailed out along with the survey afterwards. One CEU in crop management is available. If you're watching this webinar live, we will have a QR code that the CCAs can scan at the end. If you're watching the recording, we recommend self-reporting. And if you need assistance with that, you can email fieldadvisor@illsoy.org. And like I said, this is a Q&A format. Our presenters are going to start with some presentations they created to kick it off. And if you submitted a question through the registration form, we do have it. The panelists will be answering those. However, if you think of questions throughout the webinar, just use the chat feature and we will combine those and ask them after the presentations. All right, so we will go ahead and meet our panelists today. So if you're not familiar with the Illinois Soybean Association, the Checkoff does fund an in-house agronomy team, and their objectives are agronomic research, education and outreach, collaboration, and trials. So our first presenter today will be Abigail Peterson. She's the Director of Agronomy for Illinois Soybean Association. She holds a bachelor's in agronomy from Iowa State University, and previously she worked as a soybean seed production in Iowa and then as a field manager for the Soil Health Partnership. She developed soil health plans and coordinated cover crop trials. At ISA, Abigail leverages her experience to lead agronomic research and outreach, helping farmers find the best soybean solutions. And she's also a certified crop advisor. So thanks, Abigail, for being here. Dr. Stacy Zuber is the research data scientist for the Illinois Soybean Association, where she develops on-farm research and trials to support Illinois soybean farmers. She holds a master's and PhD in crop sciences from the University of Illinois and completed postdoctoral research at Purdue and the University of Missouri. And previously, she worked as the Illinois Soil Health Specialist for NRCS, focusing on soil health outreach. So thank you, Stacy, for being here today. And then finally, Stephanie Porter is the outreach agronomist for the Illinois Soybean Association, supporting the agronomy team's outreach efforts through Field Advisor. With over 25 years of experience, she recently corrected me on that. She said she's getting older. With over 25 years of experience in agronomy, conservation, and plant diagnostics, Stephanie holds a bachelor's in crop science and a master's in plant pathology from the University of Illinois. She's a certified crop advisor and was named the 2018 Illinois Certified Crop Advisor Master Soybean Advisor, which is one of the Field Advisor Awards. So, all right, well, Abigail, you're first up. We'll have you start your presentation, followed by Stacy and then Stephanie. So take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Kels. And hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully a smooth transition. Get this up. Someone interrupt if it's not showing, but happy to be on and good morning.
You're good.
I usually don't get, thank you. I usually don't get to give presentations this time of year because everyone's so busy, and then I'm usually busy. So this was a nice refresh to kind of get back into some of these agronomic planting, springtime fun type of issues that we have. So I would say, I think from our backgrounds that Kelsey gave, you might notice we do have a strong pull towards soil health systems and soybean systems management with cover crops. So my presentation specifically does focus a lot on what you should be looking for this planting season with cover crops, things that I've noticed throughout the years, things that I'll be looking for this spring while I'm out in fields. Hopefully after this I can get outside today. As we've had the last 2 days around here in Princeton, Illinois have been pretty good, but we've been wet overall. So I'll be looking forward to getting to more scouting early season, which is pretty important when you talk about cover crops management. Getting out into fields, getting out of the truck, looking at stages, looking at the soil conditions, especially with moisture control. So that's really what I'll be talking about throughout this presentation. Was really happy to see some of the questions that came in that we can talk about. But again, I'll just reiterate, as an agronomy team here, we're always here all year round to answer questions. And what we don't know, we'll go find for you. So we have a host of experts that we work through our network. But also, if it's a challenging question, it gives us a challenge to go find someone and look into those answers. So we're just happy to be able to serve in this capacity for your checkoff. So one thing, as the most beautiful cover crop, as you can see here, we've always get a lot of comments this time of year, either from just passerbyers on the road thinking, "What's that beautiful purple cover crop?" And it's like, well, that's a nice stand of henbit. So we do have a lot of this year. So those winter annuals, come back in vengeance. And it really does affect planting conditions. Chickweed's another one. I'll be fooled once in a while. I'll see a good cover crop stand at the front of the field. And then, walking into the field, I'll be fooled into it's a solid stand of chickweed or a solid stand of some of the winter cress weeds that get out of hand. And that's not what we want. We're using cover crops specifically for a reason. And actually, the neighbor's field to this is in Putnam, Illinois, sandier ground. And the field right next to it was cereal rye and not a purple flower in sight. So I think it is interesting at this early in the season when you can't row the cash crop yet, or if the soy or corn aren't in, the cover crop does, or the weeds stand out, and you can start to see patterns. Is it where we have low spots in the field where we're seeing nutsedge or something specific that we can tell why that weed is growing for the environment that it's in? Or is it something that maybe we should consider with a cover crop, because also herbicide efficacy, herbicides being able to get on the fields isn't always the solution. So gotta get the strong purple field photos. They're always quite vibrant. But as we're getting into planting, like geographically for reference, I'm up in Princeton, Bureau County, Illinois, here between Wynette and Princeton. So I get to see a lot of the countryside between here and Bloomington, because that's where the main office is, and I travel quite a bit between. And so I go through Peru, I go through Henry, and I go through Peoria, different ways to get back and forth. And it's been pretty slow going. We had about a good window last week. Planters have been in, since Easter weekend with the rains. It's been pretty slow going. I saw NAS had their April 20th report about 10% of soybeans in the ground for the state, which I would agree with. I mean, I've gotten calls from Western Illinois where they've been stopped now because of rains, but they were going pretty solid early on in the year. South of Bloomington, I think fields are more fit in these conditions now. They've missed a couple of the rains. Further south, as we know, have been pretty well saturated. So, but we're on par for a normal year. Usually we're at 7%, the last 5-year average. So 10% isn't really too off base. But really looking into the fields that I walk with, either strip till, no till, or cover crop, the moisture conditions can really cause an effect of when to plant and make a difference to if you get huge stand reductions or huge issues with establishment that affects success throughout the whole year. You're really setting yourself up. You got to get your planting date right, which usually I'm looking at the soil temperatures. And honestly, soil temperatures for me, when I first started talking about the different types of conventional systems versus tillage systems, but also cover crop systems, it was kind of always a big misconception or a holdback for farmers on soil temperatures warming up. And So I always go out every year and I'm moving that little soil temperature probe and all the different types of residue, because I get right in the soil with the right next to the roots of the cover crop. I'm getting in between corn stalks and black soil, and then I get into almost powdered soil, which is a lot around here. Um, uh, Probably has been tilled about 2 times now, and not seeing too big of temperature swings. We can really warm up just as fine in these systems. What I really love is these are all in my backyard here. I got a tillage field right next to me. We've been no-till on fields behind me for over 15 years. And then I got a strip till field there. So these are all midday soil temperatures taken. You can kind of see the cloud cover. So all somewhat anecdotal, but at the same time, just for a snapshot in time during the day, uh, not seeing huge fluctuations in soil temperature, which is we don't want cold beans, don't like cold feet too much. So that's something that I do take as an importance. I added these photos one year. Stephanie and I went out and did a lot of frost damage of soybeans. That usually comes up when we talk about early planting, especially in Illinois where we've pushed that limit. I don't think this year it's come up as much, but one thing we've noticed is just the severity of the frost. And in some cases where the no-till has been worse off, where you'd think that maybe that black soil will allow more risk for the frost to come in, but in some no-till situations, it actually frosted worse. So we have looked at frost damage in soybeans being a big issue, but this year not coming up too much. But the severity being interesting, and how you mitigate that and make those replant decisions. But again, with soil temperatures and cover crops, like I said, it's one of the main things I look at. This was an April 16th field last year. Beans sat in the ground for a long time. So these beans were in um, before April, and they just sat and sat. And then they look kind of sickly coming out. They're a little bit pale, but that once they got out of the soil and things really warmed up, they were on par with each other. But I will say what I do notice in cover crops is a stronger seed establishment when we have some of these adverse conditions. Because when we do get severe rains or we do get some of the temperature swings with the spring, the soil health system seemed to mitigate those swings to be less severe. So I definitely look out for that when we're talking about seed establishment, because again, you don't want to be going back in. You want to have a good establishment to set you up for a good year. So this year I was out. I had to get out. I was itching to get out. I thought, I'm going to be on this webinar. I can't. If I'm going to say I'm an agronomist, I need to get out to the stinking field. So I did get caught in the rain. What, Tuesday. But I was happy to be out. This field has already been planted. You can see there's some cover crop that overwintered. We had a dry fall, so I have noticed some of the fields that I know of that were planted in cover crops late. The establishment just as robust as we've seen. It's already been terminated. I'm a little skeptical of how well of a termination that we got, but you can see here the cover crop's not very aggressive. But what's really great and what I've really stood out for some of the fields that I've worked on is the strip till application. And so you can see this is you can see the wide strip here, almost 15 inches there across of pure, uh, properly laid seed bed. You can see I dug soil in the strip versus the non-strip, or in the middle of the strip, and that no-till still generates a lot of that good soil structure. You can see there whether it be residue, root, or worm, micropores and holes there. Great infiltration, but still getting that beautiful benefit from the strip. I love it. And then when we get into years of where the biomass does get robust, either the farmer went out and planted a good healthy rate and this is what he was striving for, or we just get into a season where we just had a good fall planting and it just got more robust in the spring than we thought. This is April 21st, and this has already been planted. So this was last year. But I love it because you get the benefit of that strip holding on to a good seed bed. getting good anchorage in the ground, not too close to other cover crops for, you know, any competition, soil warming up, but all of that biomass with good weed suppression, being able to mitigate harsh weather swings if we get hard rains, if we have wind, which has been an ongoing issue, you know, that soil is anchored into the ground. We've got good moisture control. It's looking really good, and that farmer has more flexibility for termination, which termination then is the biggest issue I've got next. This is another field, April 6th down south. I love it. This isn't even strip till. This is where the farmer goes in and just leaves one of his a skip gap in his planter essentially, and beautiful. You have a seed bed there that's easy to plant into, but capturing all the soil health benefits that you can. Again, there's a lot of ways to do it, and I really appreciate farmers that let me trespass on their fields to get these to investigate how this grows throughout the year, because it's unpredictable like we are in a spring right now, in my opinion. With getting in and having some termination on these cover crops gets harder than you think. Now, what I do like sometimes about, we're getting to the end of April here, April 24th, is planting green. Because if you have wet conditions, you're worried about good days that you have to spray, and you'd rather just get the beans in the ground. Farmers planting green. So you can see this was 2022. The picture of the beans was taken on May 20th. The beans were planted on April 29th, and the cereal rye here was terminated May 10th, which is perfect. I'd rather have a bean in this consideration maybe planted a little later, because, you know, if it's early in the season where we're just not getting good soil temps that are not only 50 degrees then, but looking as a good warming future in that forecast. If you plant, in this case, it was planted April 29th, it got out of the ground pretty quickly, and then he was able to make his way and determine when that cereal rye would properly uptake that chemical and get a good kill the first time. And really, here's what I watch for is, yeah, how does that residue affect plant growth? And it's pretty exaggerated here on my notebook, but that really doesn't affect the long-term growth development as it goes. So there are cases where we do get lengthy beans because of residue, and I monitor that. But this is a clear case of something that I like with when you're trying to understand, should you plant, should you terminate, should you plant green then terminate, and just what scenario you're in, and what planter setup you have. Obviously, if you have certain attachments or things that help with your planter to get into the ground. But like I said, going back to my then main concern is termination. Not only with maybe the type of chemical we're using, if we're using a mix that's antagonistic towards one another that we might not catch in the mix that we're using, if we're using something in the mix that has nitrogen and has a burn, burns the leaves, doesn't get the chemical in, or in some cases that I've seen in these types of year, or and more in the springs, is if we're not the ones spraying, they get too late into the field in the day. It's 7 p.m. and they're spraying, and too cold, and it really just sets it up for a bad overall termination. And you don't want to be handling that management issue after the fact. But again, termination.
Abigail, sorry to interrupt. We have about 2 more minutes, and then we'll have to keep going on. Thank you.
I'll like I said, I don't get a lot to show for the beginning of the year, so I'm getting excited about planting. We want to avoid wet biomass for cover crops in the spring. So one thing to mitigate. Also, closing that seed trench. You'll find in every single field, doesn't matter what field, I could usually find one slug. But what we do notice in fields are slug issues. And when you don't get that seed trench closed, that it's just a racetrack for these little guys, and they're slow moving. But when you open it up to this, they'll just run down the rows like candy. I've had fields that I've had to go do some troubleshooting and see what we can do for the slug damage. One thing I do want to highlight though is we are working on our field trials for this next 2026 season. So we have field trials this year that the other you'll hear Stacy talk about next. But we're already thinking about our next year trials, and we are thinking about something with looking at insecticides, looking at beneficials. And so if you're interested, I do encourage you to stick around with us. But with that, I will let things move on. I did a little plug here for getting onto the On-Farm Trial Network interest form through Field Advisor. I think everything you see here will be what we experience in the field, and we'd love to experience that along with you with one of our trials and having you research something along with us. Thank
Great.
you. That's all I
Thank
got.
you. I hate to cut you off. I know you have a lot of good stuff. But if you have questions for Abigail, use that Q&A feature and then we'll come back after we get through Stephanie. So Stacy, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. Like Abigail said, I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a update overview of what we're doing right now with the On-Farm Trial Network, and kind of what that looks like for this year. This was set up as an initiative, the agronomy team is really focusing on to get more on-farm research out there, really focusing on kind of this big aspect of our strategic plan, which is, demonstrating the agronomics, focusing on a lot of aspects of that, the soil and water, resiliency, land stewardship, a lot of pieces in that. So how we do this, kind of where we start, is finding out what farmers are interested in, what are concerns that they are dealing with. And so from that, we do have a soybean productions concern survey, a growing concern survey that you can fill out. It's there's links on Field Advisor. Hopefully some of you who are on this webinar have been able to fill that out in the past. We have that running year round, so at any time you can go ahead and fill that out and we will take a look at what you have to say on there. I just want to give kind of very basic overview of some of what we found from this so far. So these results are just from up to March 6th. So, we had over 150 people take that survey up to that point. And, 82% of them are farmers. We have some agronomists and consultants also taking the survey. And some of the big things we asked about is what are topics that are of interest to you, that you have concerns about, that we need to do more work in. So this was just, we asked about all of these different topics, and participants in the survey, they rated it on a scale from 0 to 5. What are their concerns? What are the topics that are of interest to them? So I just wanted to kind of highlight, the top 6 concerns or topics that we had in there. Weed management came out on top. We had genetics and breeding, disease management, nutrient management, soil health, and insect management. And a lot of those really align with what we hear from farmers, and maybe some are a little bit of a surprise, but I know it's not a surprise that weed management is up on top. Farmers are interested in the management of all these different pests. How do we manage nutrients? So it's really exciting, to get this kind of confirmation of what we're already seeing a little bit. And we're using that to really hone in on what are the topics that we want to focus on and what kind of topics we want to fund for checkoff funded research that, university and researchers are doing, but also what we are able to do through our on-farm trial network. And so kind of getting to that, we had this question in there as well, kind of trying to grasp how important is it for that on-farm research to be, really localized and getting that important. So it's within a close geography to each of the farmers in the state. And, you can see on here, we have a vast majority are saying it's a 3 or higher on the rating system, where it is pretty important to them that they have that on-farm research being conducted in a similar geography to your farms. So for that, we have this on-farm trial network that we've really started ramping up in the last year or so, where it's an opportunity for us to kind of fill in and be a bridge between, there is great university research, industry research being done, but trying to fill that in there and getting more work done on farm as unbiased as a resource as possible. So that's our goal with this, is to really be practical and realistic, focusing on, how farmers will use this information and how it will actually be applied in the real world, but also providing that kind of unbiased aspect to this as well. So we're doing this kind of with 3 main areas of focus. We have some demonstrations. We have then our action trials and legacy trials, which are kind of our replicated strip trials with slightly different focuses between the 2 of them. So legacy trials, we have some of these are going to be long-term sites that have really a focus on soil health, because we know soil health and changes to the soil take a long time to occur and be able to be measured. So we're really focusing on those as more long-term sites. We're looking at cover crop, cover versus no cover. We're also hoping to add more sites maybe in the future where we're looking at different kinds of tillage operations and adding those to cover the entire site. And then maybe also help us with additional complementary research that we can do, just having those long-term sites in place that other researchers would find useful and be able to add to the research that's being done in Illinois. So just some basics about how those are set up, cover versus no cover, a minimum of 5 years. We're collecting a lot of baseline soil data and then kind of following that up, getting all that agronomic and management data and yield data along the way. The other types of trials that we're doing, we're kind of setting those up to be a lot more flexible and being able to address whatever topics come up as far as farmers are interested in, farmers have questions about, or whether even, industry comes to us with questions. But we're trying to really prioritize the current issues. For the most part, these are going to be more short term, but depending on our needs, they might end up being longer, multiple years, but they are still going to be, replicated strip trials. We're also collecting a lot of baseline data from these, so that we have that to kind of fill in and maybe use it to answer additional questions that we haven't thought of yet. So we have 2 main action trials that we are starting in 2025 that we're doing. The first that I'm going to talk about here is with soybean insecticides, the return on investment. And this is kind of in conjunction with Dr. Nick Sider at the University of Illinois. So his team and his grad students are going to be assisting and doing a lot of the insect counts, the injury assessments with that. So we're just, doing fairly simple strip trials where we have strips with no insecticide and then we have strips with insecticide. I think most of the sites that are doing this are going to be doing that foliar insecticide, and we're collecting still some baseline soil data, yield data, that kind of thing to go along with that. And then another one of our trials, and Stephanie's going to talk about this a little more, but sulfur fertilization in soybeans, that's a question that we've had a lot from farmers about, is this something we need to be doing, and how much do we need to do and what form, and all of these questions. So we're just trying to kind of get a really baseline starting point on this. There's a lot of research that's been done in Illinois already. There's been some that's been done in Indiana and other states, but we just wanted to start with a fairly simple question as to, does sulfur impact yields of soybeans? Can it improve those yields? And we wanted to make sure to capture all of the possible yield impacts that are out there. So we ended up starting with a slightly higher pounds of sulfur per acre than maybe what's usually recommended. We just wanted to make sure to capture any effect that we were going to have out there, starting with a higher amount. So we're looking at, 30 pounds of sulfur per acre of either ATS or AMS. And then some of our sites, the farmers are going to be able to add nitrogen to the control. So we can really dial in on if it's the sulfur that's causing that impact, and not the sulfur in combination with nitrogen. So we're hoping to add that piece to this as well, collecting a lot of that baseline data, and monitor the yield data as well along the way. And so these are kind of our locations that we have across the state. We are really happy that we were able to cover the majority of our state. The map on the left is all of our action trials, so the sulfur and the insecticide trials. We also have the one on the right where we're looking at our legacy trials that we're hoping to add to those over the years, the long-term sites with that, and then a couple in pink that are demonstration sites. So I think that's it for me. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stephanie to talk a little more about the sulfur.
Thanks, Stacy. Stephanie, over to you.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, you're good to go.
Good. Maybe. So I'm going to dive in, and I know we just had a question and it was submitted beforehand. So let's just get to it, right? So this is the reason we're having so many questions come in about sulfur. And I just want to reiterate that we recognize there's been a lot of research done back in my day, making me sound that older. So I do recognize Dr. Fabian Fernandez did a lot of work with sulfur back as far as I can remember. From my understanding, a lot of that work wasn't published. We have that, but now we also recognize that things change, management changes, weather has changed, all these things. And so now let's look at this again. And we also recognize that the crop physiology, I can't talk. Dr. Belo and Connor Sybil has done a lot of work as well. I've talked to Dr. Belo about sulfur as well as Connor. We talk with him. Obviously, here you see we have the Soybean Salvation Commandments. We recognize they've done work with sulfur, but let's take it a step further. That they have done small farm, small trialing. Let's do it on farm and see, what we can see. So this is our first year, but this is just a couple of revelations from the Dr. Belo lab, for example, here. And then, of course, we have Dr. Sean Castile, who this is a snap from when he was with us at Better Beans at ISA a few years ago. I've lost track of time. And so this is what he's found up until now in Indiana in some of his plots where, he may look at areas where it might be a little bit more responsive to sulfur. But he's also, worked, what timing should we be applying sulfur? So we've decided that we probably most likely, based on previous research, are going to be looking at applying sulfur before planting or at planting, depending on the source. What source are we going to be looking at? That's going to be, it can be changing in the next couple of years. At this point, we're looking at ATS and AMS, just kind of based on some of Sean's recommendations. That's not to say that we're not going to look at other sources in the future. And it's also not to say that you can't get a sulfur response by applying sulfur at R3. By a foliar source. We're also taking a look at tissue testing. They're keeping us busy this year. And so Dr. Connell Sybil is also doing ISA funded research to take a look at when is the right timing. Are we pulling the right leaf? And so we're also doing some work on farm trialing in conjunction with Dr. Connell Sybil to take a look at that and dive into that deeper. So if you have questions about that, we're trying to address those too. We also recognized at some point in time that farmers aren't just applying sulfur, they're applying other nutrients as well. And so Sean has also done some work with that. We're not quite there yet. We're just looking at sulfur, and obviously there's going to be some nitrogen sources with some of that sulfur. So one of the questions was, where do we think this is my slide where I hypothesize, or where do we think that we can get some added yield benefits from sulfur? And so this is just a rundown. This is not for sure. This is a hypothetical. Let's say we want our on-farm trialers to plant earlier. They could possibly get more of a response in cool, wet soils. We know a lot of crop consultants in the South tell me they recommend sulfur on some of those lower organic soils. That's happening right now, and for sure on sand. But also taking a look at some of those fields that have higher residue or a higher C to S ratio. So really honing in on maybe some of those fields that are no-till or cover crop. I also recognize that from my previous job that and others preliminary work that we're seeing currently at the University of Illinois, that sometimes responses to different things is very soybean variety dependent. And so that's one of my pet peeves right now, is that many researchers are only taking a look at one soybean variety or maybe two. And so I think that is something we have to be very cognizant of, that different varieties can have different responses to different things. And then lastly, this is Dr. Belo. This is perfect growing conditions or high yield environments may respond to sulfur as well. And then this was the other question: are we taking a look at ways that sulfur possibly could help with seed quality. Yes, that's another thing that I have on my list to do. So with that, sulfur can do a lot of different things for the plant. I did this very lame diagram to kind of illustrate, not everything's on here, but just some of the main components that sulfur can do for the soybean plant. So it can enhance biomass accumulation. It supports the nitrogen fixation and utilization. It also drives the chlorophyll synthesis and energy production. All very important things. But one of the things that it also does is that the sulfur is a critical component of the amino acids, which is the methionine and cysteine. So basically the proteins and the enzymes. And so what this boils down to is that grain protein levels, so the level of protein in the grain, is very dependent on nitrogen and sulfur. This is just something I grabbed from SHRIN. So that is the Soybean Research and Information Network that has a lot of great information, a lot of previous trials. So this isn't the only one. I just really like this trial. This is not in Illinois. This is in Maryland. But this is a sandy location that was very responsive to sulfur. So it's very fun to show a visual like this where you can see the strips where they applied the sulfur. It's green. It worked, right? We're seeing a response. We can see it with our eyes. And the control where they didn't have the sulfur was very light. And so what they found, just very quickly, without giving you all the details of this trial, is not only were they able to increase yield by adding sulfur, this is just one of example of where they were able to improve soybean protein by nearly doubling the percentage of methionine and cysteine, which are, again, the two amino acids that affect the nutritional value of soybeans. So luckily, we have Dr. Nave, who's at the University of Minnesota, and Abigail and I have both participated in the soybean quality survey. This is an opportunity for all growers. If you reach out to him, you can reach out to us. We're going to try to promote this as we usually do every year. But at the end of the season, you can test your grain for quality. And I have a quick list of different things that they do test for. And you can get a report back from them. And this is what we're going to also do within our trials as well, to see if we can see a difference between protein levels with each of the different, obviously, addition of sulfur or not addition of sulfur. So just something we can do by taking in the soybean quality survey. Really quickly, before my time is up, I wanted to touch base on some of the top questions I'm getting. So I take in a lot of farmer questions. I get a lot of radio interviews. I just did one. So one of the things that is happening, and I know it's not going to be, we don't want it to be a repeat of last year, but obviously the last several years we've had very, very short planting windows, and we start to get people that panic. And so within this year, we did have a very small percentage within Central Illinois that did go in during March, during a short window. Obviously, and I'm going to be frank, the planting conditions were near perfect. Moisture levels were low, which was a little scary, but it was just very hard. The weather was, I called it fall spring, was almost perfect. I don't know how you couldn't stop yourself from planting, and especially those larger growers. We actually do have some corn up near me from those planting dates, just now coming up, obviously almost a month later, but we also had a very good planting date here a week or so ago before the rain. I think Abigail did comment on, we did get 10% of our beans and we got 7% of our corn planted. And now we are here. My brothers just texted me. I had several people just text me, we see rain in the forecast. When, we shouldn't hit the panic button. We have time. We have until about mid-May before we start to technically, based on research, see kind of bushels start to decrease by you know, a half a bushel or so per acre per day. But that is just a planting date. That is just one data point. Planting date is not the only management that can lead to higher yields. And we had that example last year. So don't panic. Don't go in when the soil's not fit. We have one board member that is in the field and he put it on social media. So I think it made a couple people antsy today. He's in the eastern part of the state. And I asked around and most people are not. We have a board member in the West. He said there might be some people trying to push it today. It's going to be a couple days. In most areas of the state. I just talked to Delosh Yankee. He said he did see a planter in the field near Bloomington, but some areas there got rain where we didn't. And we're hoping we do see rain, a possible rain in the forecast, but we're hoping to get in a couple days or by the weekend, but we are much still wet. So time will tell. So these beauties, these cutworm moths are now X-stars. That doesn't sound good, but yeah, formerly Twitter stars. So I participate in the pest survey with Kelly Estes, and we'll go into that more on the next slide. But in the last week or so, we've been catching significant flights of cutworm moths, mostly cutworm moths, also trapping for some armyworm moths, also catching those. I think that based on these flights, Kelly will do the math, thank goodness, and she's going to help protect some of these cutting dates. And so they're going to be around mid-May, depending on where you are in the state, depending on flights. And also, obviously, we'll go into management is going to differ. I will tell you, I have traps in a very tilled field near my house in Christian County, and I also have a trap in a very non-tilled field that actually even has wheat in it. Still catching significant amounts in both types of fields. So then, you know, don't press the panic button. Yes, we have BT hybrids. Not all BT hybrids offer adequate protection. Most of them do now, hopefully. The non-GMO growers should be on high alert. Obviously, with a BT hybrid, that pest will have to eat it, ingest it. So you will have some damage. And if you have a high amount of damage, you still could see areas of field that could have damage. So I will not go more into it. Do you know why? Because we are lucky enough to have Kelly Estes as well as Dr. Ahmad Fakori join us around the time that we might be seeing some damage on our next webinar, which is Thursday, May 29th. So I will let Kelly go more in depth in that, but this is, again, if you want to know and watch, don't forget about the IPM type. So I obviously didn't mean to, but I accidentally have two pictures of the corn map, so just ignore that. But there's also a soybean one, or we also have soybeans test as well. But if you want to take a look at the black cutworm map and the true armyworm map, you can stay up to date with that. And then lastly, I just want to touch on, this is where my hen bed is not as pretty as Abigail's hen bed picture, but just want to touch on this. So lots of questions here. What should we do now? We were much more in a worse situation with our winter annual on our no-till fields last year because of just the warmer winter, and it was too wet to get into the field. This year it was wind, obviously kept out a lot of people from the field. So it's just constantly, you know, we can't even get in there to spray. So what should we do? The biggest thing that you can do to help control these weeds is to do a fall burn down. Obviously, some people don't want to maybe do that. If you do that, make sure that the weeds are small and actively growing. Some people don't want to spend the money there. I would say that is the investment you want to make if you have no-till and you have issues. Obviously, these weeds can harbor not only pests that we just talked about that can be flying in from the south on all these winds that are coming through, these storms, but also soybean cyst nematode can start to infest there once temperatures get 50 or above. So a lot of people are using 2,4-D. The other thing is we have to, depending on the labels and what you're applying, you have to wait before you can even plant. So that throws you off even more on when you can plant. So once you do spray, so there's confusion on dicamba. There is still some dicamba labeled for burn down prior to planting. But obviously look at the label. The caveats to this is it requires an inter-rain after application. And again, there can be a long wait before planting. The issue is that, once these winter annuals start blooming, they can become very, very hard to control. Dr. Hager says, don't worry, as a lot of people are including that glyphosate in with the 2,4-D, but the problem is again, use full rates because these weeds just really need to be knocked down. And we do not want them, even though they're so far along. You may think, they're just too far along. I'm not even going to, worry about it. You do need to still worry about it. We don't want them to go to seed. So with that,
Steffi, real
yes.
quick, someone asked, does ISA have any traps that they can get?
ISA does not have traps, but every year, Kelly Estes puts out on her, I guess, different social media handles where you can reach out to her and participate in the survey, and she will get you the traps that you need. And I also think that she'll be able to give you some more information on those traps. So if you want to give them my information, I can pass on information to them. Else. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right, you ready for some questions? One thing that wasn't talked about in these presentations that we got a couple questions on was white mold. So someone was asking any recommendations for white mold prevention and or control. And then someone asked how beneficial is a product like Heads Up in managing white mold?
Okay, you're giving me a workout here, Kels. So to answer the white mold question, I was like, why do I even need to make a slide? We have the Crop Protection Network, right? So CPN has a great resource that you can go to that really highlights a lot of the management. So we'll skip over I think most people are familiar with white mold. A lot of people are already doing all of these things that we're mentioning. And I'll just start out that in my mind, white mold, I didn't truly know what white mold was until I went to Wisconsin. So I'm just going to throw that out to you. So we think we have white mold here in Illinois, but we don't. So just throwing that out. And I do recognize there's some really, really bad fields, and I've visited them, unfortunately, as a seed agronomist in Northern Illinois that have white mold. A lot of these people are already doing you have to do a lot of things to control white mold. They're already doing a lot of things that are listed on here. We obviously recognize row spacing. That's why we have a lot of 30-inch rows of soybeans up north. They're doing obviously crop rotation, plant populations are keeping them low. And I will say from personal experience that the high fertility is more prone to white mold. And I have visited fields that had horrible white mold that had applications of manure on. Like, it is really bad. And I will say that same field that had applications of manure on it had not had beans on it for 7 years. So a rotation of even 7 years away from beans still was a horrible outbreak of white mold. One of the things that I think is happening is we have variety selection. We have a lot of soybean varieties that we have ratings on them. I recognize that. We have a lot of turnover with varieties. We have a lot of new technologies that are coming out. We have new varieties that maybe have not been truly evaluated in the right environment to know whether or not it can get white mold. So there's no complete tolerance against white mold depending on the variety. And so I think that is a start. And I've talked to a lot of different farmers about once you find that variety that has really good white mold score, hang on to it. And there's a lot of different fungicide applications. I won't go into it. I do know some of the higher managers in Northern Illinois do two passes. The key is you have to get it on at R1. There are some fungicides that are better than others. There are charts within Crop Protection Network that show that, and the feedback I get, well, they're very expensive. Well, they're good. So there are some that are really good. I've had farmers experience with things like contans. They can be expensive, but they've had success with them. So it's just a matter of how much management you want to do and how much money you want to throw at it. And I think I pretty much controlled. I hope I can help control it. Covered it, but I don't forget cover crops. I also have a former friend that's in Wisconsin, former coworker, that has seen use of cover crops to help with that. And you have to be careful, obviously, with cover crops, with soil moisture and available of soil nutrients, shading and such. But what they do is they don't actually control the white mold, but they are able to stimulate earlier emergence of that apothecia and kind of throw it off and kind of help lower the white mold incidence. But I don't think that I know of any way where you can completely get rid of white mold. So I hope I covered it there.
That was a great resource. I shared the link to the more information on white mold there. Going more towards the weeds, someone asked, before I answer, Abigail, you have anything else on white mold? No? Okay. Someone asked, what are your thoughts on current herbicide strategies, especially in light of the changing EPA regulations? I know the government relations team at Illinois Soybean Association has been doing a lot of education on this. Does anyone want to address that, because it's been such a big topic?
I guess I can take it. I mean, I don't think any of us are experts on that. I think Corey Lacey with the government relations team, like you said, he's been working with that a lot. There's a lot of good resources that Corey has worked on getting out there through Field Advisor. There's the webinar that was in March. You can find that on the Field Advisor website and the YouTube channel for the recording of that, where Dr. Erin Hager really runs through a lot more of the details of that strategy and how it might affect farmers. I think, for this, it's really a case of farmers need to be aware and stay informed. Most of this is still very much moving pieces. Some of what has come out about the mitigation strategy for the herbicide and then, the insecticide when it's been delayed somewhat, a lot of the pieces of that are really maybe not as bad as we like a lot in the industry initially feared, but it's still definitely something to work through. And I think a lot of the tools that are in that for the mitigation strategy for points for farmers and things like that, as a person who works with soil health, there are a lot of the same strategies that you use for those. So I kind of, encourage farmers to use those anyway. So hopefully this helps with that piece of it. But I think it's really just comes back to staying informed and being aware that things are very much moving on that, and be aware that those changes might be coming.
Sure. Anyone else on that question? No. Stephanie, we forgot to answer the heads up question about white mold. Do you want to address that real quick? Thanks, Stacy.
How about now?
Yep.
Okay. So shout out to Dr. Chilvers at MSU. So I reached out to him when we got this heads up question, and I've been very curious myself because I get a lot of questions about it. And so he provided me with this. It's unpublished work by Ryan Hamilton, but this is a study that was just done in Michigan. Why Michigan? They get white mold. Okay, they've got white mold. They can do the tests. They can do this there. So thank you, Dr. Chilvers. I reach out to him quite a bit for some questions. So if you're not familiar, heads up is a biological, and it's being marketed treatment on soybean diseases. So not just white mold, but also SDS. And so really quickly, if you need more information, I can share it. I just don't want to take up too much time. But he did this study over 22 and 20 through 24. They did not only small trials, they also did on-farm trials, and they looked at 7 commercial soybean cultivars. Obviously, so lots of sites. What it boiled down to is they looked at this as a seed treatment. So just wanted to make sure I pointed that out. Heads up, as a seed treatment. And basically they found no significant differences in soybean yield, SDS root, SDS foliar, or white mold disease indices. So they did not see any response. They say these findings align with some of the previous studies, and obviously there could be more work done, but some other things going on that they're finding to kind of dive in deeper. But long story short, they weren't finding a lot of response there. So.
And we'll share contact information at the end. So if you have follow-ups, you'll be more than welcome to follow up on some of the documents and resources shared. My next question is for you, Abigail, and about cover crops. And I want you to respond to those farmers. I either say, I don't have time for cover crops because it is another crop you have to manage, or how do you manage the cost because it is another cost to do cover crops. So how do you respond to those comments when a farmer asks that?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely start any conversation with, you gotta want it to work. You can't throw cover crops out as a one-stop shop idea in the fall and think that it's not going to be a lot of steps to follow through with the management throughout the whole season. So if you're already on the negative side of cover crops and not really choosing it for a specific reason, don't get started, because we have seen huge field issues that hurt yield and are quite negative. But once you figure out why you're using a cover crop and what you're choosing that cover crop for, we can really target a strategy. And I would say, for those who don't have time, you don't have to do every field. We obviously are with soybeans. It's a great system to start with your corn residue in the fall, going into soybeans, starting with cereal rye, something like that, has pretty good basics attached to it for a beginner. But know why you're applying the cover crop, why that specific field. Is it lighter ground? Are there issues with organic matter or weed control? Pick some of these issues and pick a field specifically. Don't overwhelm yourself, but don't set yourself up for failure. I feel like when you do run out of time in the fall and you get out too late, then you wonder why you did put that 20 to 30 per acre cost out there and you have no establishment in the spring. Or you did a winter kill and you're thinking, I've done winter kills for the last so many years, haven't seen any differences. You got to put some skin in the game. And I would say reach out to your local commodity groups, Farm Bureau, USDA, Extension. There are cost share programs, and we're here to help. But yeah, we've seen enough mistakes made that you should be reaching out now to a specialist to make sure you're mitigating all those risks.
Anyone else have anything to add?
I don't have a lot to add because I think Abigail covered it all, but the only thing other I would say is just, she kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's a whole system that might need to shift. It's not, you can't just expect to throw soybeans out or throw cover crops out and not make adjustments to other pieces of that. And that's where I think starting small, building, you can learn those things as you go. But if you just expect to do cover crops and not make any other adjustments, you're going to probably be more likely to fail than if you think about the whole approach as a system and how those cover crops and the residue affect your nutrient management or your weed management, all these other pieces of that as well.
I know we're coming up on time. I have 2 more questions. One, it goes back to weed management. Someone, when they registered, they asked about grassy weed pressure and best management practices for that. Stephanie, I believe you talked to Dr. Hager about that, correct? There you go.
Yeah, so I reached out, as I usually do, to Dr. Hager a lot. So just a rundown, there isn't much new in respect to grasses and their control. There are concerns in areas of Kentucky that Johnson grass is making a resurgence, which was one of my dad's arch nemesis when I was growing up, possible due to resistance to glyphosate, so keep that in mind. There are one and more annual grass species resistant to glyphosate in Western Tennessee, but up until now, we haven't seen any similar reports or finding in Illinois. Not to say we can't, so keep that in mind. Always mow field ditches before seed production to help prevent weed seed from moving into the field. And then there's also a scouring rush that typically begins in small patches that, if left uncontrolled, can get really, really nasty. I know that from experience. The other thing that he wanted to point out, and I have been reading a lot about this, is volunteer corn can be an issue when combining certain things, tank mixes, with the 2,4-D choline or the Enlist system. So we've been finding that out. So if you haven't heard of that, keep that in mind. So for example, some of the ACCase inhibitors, you may not be able to tank mix those because they basically just won't work. There's antagonism. So another one that they're finding that has antagonism with 2,4-D is clethodim. So basically it works normally, but when you add it to 2,4-D, it does not work. And so then you're left with a lot of volunteer corn, and we don't want that in the field. And so some things that you may be able to do is adjust application methods or add adjuvants, but as always, read your herbicide label.
Excellent advice. Before I ask my final question, anything we missed that you guys had prepared for? Good to
Well, I
go?
have quite a bit, Kels, so I don't know if you want to do a podcast or I want to do a call.
It sounds like a good idea. Well, it definitely sounds like we're going to have to do a follow-up. I think we got some really great questions. Hopefully maybe we'll do this again, maybe come summertime, talk maybe a bit more about conservation, cover crops going to that season. But my final question for all three of you, and this is a real quick hit. Give us what you see as the top agronomy challenge for Illinois growers heading into this season, or as they're planting, and it is now the 2025 season. So, Abigail, you want to start?
Yeah, I was agronomist. It depends. Every year, though, I feel the in-season management gets tighter and tighter. What we're sacrificing, I think, in-season scouting for those fungicide applications or something like that can be cost saving to not have to apply if you're not seeing issues and you're not having threshold concerns. I would say be aware of that. I also, with every year, I think Kelsey's been doing some content with Matt Reardon with Nutrient Ag Solutions on the weather side of things. I'd encourage people to keep up with the weather. When we get in season, whether it's going to be drought or what issues, I do really worry about farmers that don't take advantage of their soil systems, that they could really hold on to more moisture when we get super dry into these, when we get into the hot months. And that's where I see a lot of the issues when those plants get super stressed with low water. Some of these soil systems can really help mitigate that. And so that's what I'll be watching out for too, going into this season.
Stacy, what about you?
Well, Abigail kind of stole some of the stuff I was going to talk about, but yeah, I think the weather is always a key thing. And I think it's something we've seen more and more frequently with heavy rainfall events, and how do our soils handle that heavy rainfall? I come from a soil health background, and I know there's a lot of that it's harder for some farmers to adopt than others, but most of Illinois, you have soils that are poorly drained, somewhat poorly drained. So you install tile to fix that problem, to avoid the ponding in your fields. But I think one of the pieces in a soil health system that really can help, and I think some farmers are not noticing that this is a solution that you can have there, is if you can't get that water through the top 2 inches of your soil to make it to the tile, doesn't do that much good for you. It's a massive investment that's kind of going to waste because you still have water running off the surface because it's not making it in. And that's where I think some of those soil health systems can help with, you know, improving the aggregates of your soil, improving the water infiltration. And so taking advantage of that where you can. And then, you know, there's always wind. And I know you talked to Kelsey talked about that with Matt Reardon. There's wind issues. You know, we have already kind of over the average of the number of tornado events in Illinois for the year. And I just saw a local meteorologist posting like May is usually the big month for that. So that's not even just an agronomy concern, but everybody be careful for that perspective in the spring. Thanks.
Thank you, Stacy. Stephanie, wrap it up for us.
Well, I'm going to be boring, but I'm going to be real. It's definitely weeds. And I think, you know, Stacy showed that. I think that has continued through my career to be the top thing. And I think the biggest issue that we are facing today and into the future. And I think all the things that were mentioned, especially with the weather and the wind, we have to be very careful as we continue to take responsibility, to read labels, and to be responsible as people in agriculture, as farmers, as others that are making applications out there to do it responsibly, because there are people out there that are wanting to take away some of the tools in our toolbox, and they're going to use anything they can do to do that. So not only is it the weed the problem, it's also the weather, as well as us trying to overcome all the obstacles and then having more obstacles come in our path to take away the tools that what we have left to work with. So we are going to have to look towards other ways besides herbicides to control weeds.
All right, that's a great way to wrap it up. I want to thank you, all three of you, for taking the time today to have our live Q&A webinar. I think we covered a lot of ground within that hour, so a lot going on. If you have additional questions, right there on the screen, fieldadvisor@ilsoy.org. You can email us there, and then we'll get that question to the right person if you have follow-up questions. The recording will be available soon. If you're a CCA, don't forget to scan the QR code right there for your credits. I will also say the next Field Advisor webinar, Stephanie alluded to this, is going to be Thursday, May 29th. It's be a pest and disease watch with Kelly Estes and Dr. Ahmad Fakori with Southern Illinois. So registration will be open soon. We'll talk more about the insects and disease part of this, and we'll get an update from Kelly to see how some of that's going, and then on the disease side as well. So thanks all for joining. We appreciate you tuning in today. Thank you.